And start. Hey guys! Okay, so today we're covering chapter 2, and I'm lecturing kind of as I go. This is going to be interesting because Cisco WebEx is down today, so that means I have to record everything on YouTube. The only thing I can't do with YouTube is I cannot record, show the PowerPoint slides as I go along. So you might have to follow along as I kind of go. Okay, there's a bunch of stuff in puberty. We're probably not going to be able to cover it all today because this is only a 15-minute class. Joy. So it's just like, I'm going to tell you what I know. I'm going to be explaining the pubertal aspects. Hopefully we'll get to the halfway point, and I'll record a second lecture on Friday, if that's acceptable to all. Does anyone have any problems with that so far? Has that been a hardship or a difficulty for anybody? The questions aren't due until the test is due. It's okay if you, and I may have gotten the deadlines mixed up on the page. All you got to do is make sure you turn in by the test. You're fine. I'm not going to stress deadlines this semester because we're all kind of in a we're all up in the wind right now, to excuse the hurricane pun. But yeah, we're all kind of up in the wind. That was a very unintentional hurricane pun. Okay, so if you guys can't hear me because of my mask, I'm sorry, but I have to make sure my face is covered at all times. Okay, so we talked about adolescence being culturally constructed, right? Talked a little bit about that last time. We know for a fact that adolescence is different in different cultures, it's looked at differently, and sometimes in some cultures it doesn't exist at all. The concept of adolescence is somewhat new. So the biological changes of puberty are a central part of adolescence and development, because puberty is a part of it. And frankly, it causes a lot of us to be hormonal and sometimes difficult to be around. But it's all essential because it's a period of transition, right? We're not kids, we're not adults. We have to figure out who we are in this time period. So it's not only psychological, it is also physical, and sometimes it's very important to understand what's going on with your body. And some of you guys already been through this, so you might be like, oh man, I know what that's like. Okay, there's different parts of the body. Now, there's obviously different hormonal glands. This is where the majority of these changes take place, is because of these hormonal glands. Now, the hormonal glands in the body, or just glands, have to do with. I probably need to make this a little bigger, don't I? Is this big enough for you guys? Okay. Got the pituitary gland located in the brain. Basically, it is considered the essential part of all growth. The pituitary gland is the master gland. Okay. The pituitary gland and the thyroid work together with the hypothalamus to regulate hormones throughout the body. You guys know what the hypothalamus is, right? When you have a hard time knowing what or remembering what a hypothalamus is, remember its job is to regulate the internal temperature and processes of the body. Okay? So without the hypothalamus, you're in a pretty tight state. Okay, the hypothalamus' job is to cool you down when you get so hot. Because right now I feel like a droplet of sweat going down my back. That's because my body's telling my brain it's hot. So it's sending me some sweat to cool me down. A very unattractive but very necessary process. So we have the hypothalamus that's responsible for controlling the pituitary gland, the master gland, and the thyroid, and interacting with all the other ones. Now, the adrenal glands you think they'd be located in the brain, but no, they're actually located in the kidneys. And that's very important for male testosterone release. Now, I don't know if you guys know this, but women have testosterone too. Yeah, we have a small amount of testosterone. And we have our gonads and sex glands, which is where our secondary sexual characteristics come from. I'm sorry, I'm confusing androgens with adrenal glands. Adrenal glands are mostly in the kidneys. Androgens are mostly located in the testes. The thyroid gland is something that I constantly struggle with. That is basically responsible for a lot of stuff in terms of metabolism and growth. So I'm going to break that down in a second. So we can argue that puberty in women, since there are mostly women in here, I can talk about this, is the onset of menarche, which is our first period, essentially. That's what we call it. So hormones are glands released by the endocrine system. And guys, you don't have to write all this down if you don't want to, because it's all on here. You guys have access to these PowerPoints? I put them in your file. I was super terrified you guys don't have access to them. Because sometimes when they're put in a file, it's hard to get access to them. But I know I can access them. I don't know if you guys can, so that causes me some distress. Okay, so puberty happens in the hypothalamus, right? Hypothalamus is part of the master gland. It is responsible for maintaining homeostasis, which is the body's way of regulating its internal hormones. If you have a hard time remembering what the hypothalamus does, hypothalamus. Imagine a farmer chasing around some llamas on a mountainside trying to cool them down by spraying them with a hypodermic needle. Yes, that's meant to be funny. Hypothalamus. That's how I remember it, and I think it's funny. I have all these people in mnemonics for how to remember different parts. Am I going too fast? I'm assuming you guys went ahead and read already, so that's cool. Hormonal changes begin in the hypothalamus. So you have this GnRH begins at puberty, and this increased level occurs once the threshold of body fat is reached. So fat cells produce the protein leptin and provides a signal to release this hormone, GnRH. And our body's ability to regulate fat has a lot to do with the hypothalamus. The leptin sends feedback mechanisms into the brain to help control metabolism and control what hunger. So the endocrine system is possibly one of the most important parts of our body. Okay, and if you do have issues with the hormones in any way, shape, or form, that is something that you can probably fix with medication or surgery, preferably normally medication. So hormonal imbalances can be corrected. Gonadotropins release GnRH, reaches the pituitary gland. We have this follicle stimulating hormone. So you're probably wondering what the pituitary gland is. It's located at the base of the brain that releases gonadotropins, part of the body's prep for reproduction. Pituitary gland is kind of works with the hypothalamus and works with the other hormones in order to produce this information about the body. So this is basically our body's chemical messenger system. We need these chemical messengers in order to signal growth and basically maintain the sense of homeostasis throughout the body. Without this, it's going to be difficult. Stimulate the growth of hair. So during this, and I teach all this in Psych too, by the way. So if you want to, I do talk about puberty and hormones on that one too. The ovaries and testes are basically sex glands. They do produce these hormones of estrogens and androgens. Estrogens produce most female hormones, and androgens are mostly produced by testes, and they produce testosterone. Testosterone are released in times of sexual behavior and aggression. So we have the adrenocorticotropic hormone causes the adrenal glands to really increase androgen production. Okay, so those hormones stimulate the other hormones basically. They're mostly responsible for male primary and secondary sexual characteristics. So basically, you probably are having a hard time understanding the difference between primary and secondary sexual characteristics, right? It's really simple. Primary characteristics are things like the change in the actual sex organs themselves. Secondary sexual characteristics have to do with things that aren't directly related to the concept of reproduction, like increased hair growth. You know, your hair growth starts happening during puberty. Tends to be super awkward because you're like, oh, I don't have hair on my legs yet. My friends have hair on their legs already. Oh my God, what's wrong with me? You know. So that's something that we've all experienced as women. We kind of compare ourselves to our friend groups and get all nervous, or maybe you're like, haha, I got hair on my legs and you don't, ha ha ha. You know, I'm more of a woman or whatever. I don't know. But maybe they have this way of competing, and some people, some women who develop earlier or later. Well, if you develop earlier as a woman, you tend to get a little ostracized. Typically, that's how it normally is. So all those things like hair growth, breast development, muscle growth, those are all considered secondary sexual characteristics. Does that make sense, guys? Okay. And that has to do with mostly male and females, because male and females both have secondary sexual characteristics that start developing during puberty. So girls have a whole bunch of different hormonal changes. So girls obviously have less testosterone, as you can see here. So they produce, and by the way, guys, I'm on slide 10 right now, if you guys want to follow along. Boys have pretty much a steady increase in testosterone in different stages of puberty. Women have very high estradiol. I just pronounce it estrogens. That's how I say it. Men have a very slow or no increase whatsoever. Both men and women have estrogen production and testosterone production. Just people who are born male tend to have a lot heavier testosterone production. Am I making any kind of sense here? Am I going too slow? Okay. Let me know if I'm going too slow, because my last class I was going too fast and I did not mean to. Okay, so you have the feedback loop of the endocrine system, right? It monitors and adjusts levels of sex hormones. Your body's job is to constantly maintain itself. Okay, so something happens and you can't, for some reason, you produce too much or produce too little, your body will kind of compensate for that. So step one is the optimal level. The feedback loop is responsible by the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, the gonads, and monitors and adjusts the levels of sex hormones in your body. So it doesn't just produce the same amount all the time for everybody. That's the funny thing about the human body. It depends on your genetics, who you are, and your body will sometimes compensate for that. Guys, thank you so much for putting up with me today. It's just I did not expect technology to go south. Where you have primary and secondary sex characteristics, and basically starts with the. This kind of starts as a loop where you don't just produce this; you actually have different other hormones signaling this. How much or how little is being produced. I don't think the hypothalamus is the primary one that starts with. The hypothalamus is the homeostasis. All right. Okay, so we got this whole physical growth during puberty thing. We all know that adolescents have a growth spurt. I also know that you also have a growth spurt before puberty too. So you have this adolescent growth spurt. This growth surges when puberty arrives. So girls have about 3.5 inches per year, and boys have 4.1 inches per year. You have this uneven growth, right? You have the extremities first, so you might. This is why teenagers seem kind of awkward sometimes, because there might be extremities first in terms of growth, and there's a muscle growth spurt, and levels of body fat do surge when it comes to this change in your body or in your internal organs and your hormones. Your levels of body fat might surge. You know? So you have this rapid increase in height. Okay, rapid increase of height that takes place at the beginning of puberty. And peak height velocity is when the adolescent growth spurt is at its maximum rate. So you grow really fast in a very small amount of time. And that might cause you physical pain. But the thing is, you have this uneven growth spurt. So it doesn't always occur at the same time. You might have a bigger body than the other. Might have disproportionate length over time. It doesn't always happen at the same time in an even way. Your body growth is not graceful, and that's one of the reasons I have so much compassion for teenagers, because it's not easy to have to deal with that. So it does differ from girls and boys. So let's say we have these age years, right? Boys and girls do have a somewhat even, as you can see, not really even, but We tend to have a different height growth area. Our heights tend to grow at the same time, right? The rest of our bodies between males and females doesn't grow at the same rate, obviously. But our heights tend to be somewhat similar. For girls between the ages of 11 and 15, there tends to be a huge spike in height velocity in terms of growth, just in terms of physical height growth. Okay. Girls tend to be a little shorter than boys. I still have yet to determine what is the biological or evolutionary advantage of that. You guys are welcome to have your own theories on that. I'm over here like, why do guys have to be taller than girls? But as a general trend, yeah, the guys tend to be a little taller. But their growth rate spikes for guys around 13 to 15. Girls, it's around 11 to 13. And we tend to have less and less growth after that. Which is weird because I tended for some reason get taller in my 20s. I don't know how. But that's how it works. In terms of muscle mass, men and women, you can see the blue line's kind of women. We tend to have a less, we tend to have less muscle mass. So you can see the muscle mass right here. We tend to have muscle mass for both of us, right? We tend to have an increase. It tends to like really get at the highest at 16. So girls tend to have less muscle mass than guys do typically. That's not always true for every girl and every guy, but as a general trend, women tend to have less. And for guys, let's see, for females, we tend to have higher amounts of body fat. And it's typically harder for women to lose body fat. Why? Because we're meant to have that on us. That's what society likes to tell us. So honestly, guys, when the onset of puberty differs from males and females, honestly, women tend to start it with menarche, which is their first period. That's the onset of adolescence, typical physical onset. Ovum is releasing ovum or mature eggs, right? It's released every 28 days and we release about 400 over our lifespan. We tend to release one egg per cycle. As I'm sure you guys already know, because I'm sure you guys were taught that already in like high school, middle school. I'm probably preaching to the choir here. Sperm. That typically happens. That typically happens when the male's young adolescent, normally depending, and that's considered the onset of puberty for males. Any questions so far? Am I just going over your guys' heads right now? Some of you guys are familiar with this in certain areas. I'm trying to explain this like scientifically and personally. So we're talking about primary sexual characteristics. Remember how I said that that's the organs that are actually related to the sexual aspect. So changes prepare body for sexual reproduction. Remember, this is primary sex characteristics. So we have male penises and testicles grow during that time. The body grows up and goes into spermarchy. And for women, females release an ovum, and you don't start ovulating at the first menstruation. So people, like if you watch Game of Thrones, you think that, oh, well, if the woman has her first period, she's ready to have a child. That's not necessarily true. Okay? The character Sansa, I don't know if you guys watched the show or if you guys are just totally disillusioned after the 8th season, but basically, she was so terrified that she can have kids and she didn't want that, you know? But honestly, you don't ovulate and release the egg after your first menstruation. It might happen after a while. So you're not necessarily able to have kids once you start having a period. Does that make sense, guys? It might take a while. And honestly, just because your body can carry an egg doesn't mean it really should. That might be a little difficult. But when I talk about secondary sexual characteristics, I'm talking about body changes that are not directly related to reproduction. So again, hair growth, things like that. I'm not talking about the change of eggs and all that stuff. If I'm going too much on stuff you already know, let me know. Because I don't want to talk down to anybody. Some of you guys have probably been taught this already in school, but okay, so the deepening of the voice for men, that's part of it. Males grow hair in chest, shoulder, and back. Females experience breast growth. It's very true. Like, I think your breasts stop growing around the age of 25. I'm like, darn, I'm just by 6 years. But glands in the skin increase production. So basically, some people like they don't. Some people don't really stink when they sweat until they hit puberty. But sometimes that can make it worse. That's when you start teaching people to, hey, dude, you gotta start wearing deodorant. You don't smell so good, you know, because the hormones in your body smells differently. Of course, hairiness in arms and legs increase. It's very obvious, very visible. This hair is designed to keep you warm. So you typically have changes in your external body that's very, very obvious that occur at the same time. Which I find is interesting. It's like there's outward signals and inward signals. So as you can see, there's the 5 different stages of breast development. I think breast development normally ends around the age of 25. That's kind of what it's like when you're really young and you start developing fullness over time. Because, I mean, your body's trying to get ready to produce a child, so, and nurture one, so your body's going to change as that happens. I'm going like stupid fast right now. Yes, we have a developed breast, ovulation, broader hips. It's going to change, like your body's going to become more curvaceous as you get older, and if you don't, well, that's fine. You typically have pubic hair. You have mature genital organs. Your body's ready to menstruate because your body's ready to release eggs because your your I was about to use the wrong word there. Your uterus has this amount of blood. It's trying to build up so that way it can support a fetus or an egg, a fertilized egg, a zygote, in other words, when it's embedded and it grows. So in that case, your body has too much of layers in there the process of menstruation. So for men, you have wider shoulders and chest. You have body hair, underarm hair, things like that. You can tell when a guy typically hits puberty when all that starts to go down, and you have increased sperm production during that time. Most of the stuff you already know. So for female order, you get the pubic hair first. That's typically the sign, like, okay, girl, your first period's gonna come. Be ready. And you might notice, the kid might notice, okay, well, I'm changing right now. This is something to be aware of. It's like a signal. Start developing breast. You get the growth spurt. To get itself ready to be an adult. So you have this menarche, underarm hair, insufficient oil and sweat. So you start to really stink when you sweat. That's when you're encouraged to wear things like deodorant. So again, for males, they have growth of testes, pubic hair growth, growth spurt, and this is all the order it's supposed to be in. Penis growth, underarm hair, starts to stink when you sweat, and you have this sense of facial hair. So the facial hair kind of grows over time. And it doesn't always happen right away. Some guys have this like really awkward mustache when they first start hitting puberty. I'm like, oh god, you look adorable. I seriously get that little facial hair. It grows as you get older. Once you get more and more testosterone in your body, your hair, get more facial hair. Some people prefer to have it. Some people don't prefer to have it. So for men and women, they tend to hit puberty not exactly at the same time as you can see here, but the changing point is primarily male. I like the fact that my voice got deeper too because I don't like the way I feel when I'm a kid. You can tell I sound like a kid. I feel like, oh god, thank goodness I sound more mature now. You know, people take me seriously. Okay, so girls have puberty earlier than guys do. They have breast development. These develop skin a little sooner. So we do say that women mature quicker than guys, right? Physically speaking, yeah, we do. Physically speaking, we do. Emotionally, we have to deal with some of the adult problems very early, much earlier. I love that story. I'm not trying to say these things in the right deep way because this is the things that we all deal with, right? But again, we do have to deal with this stuff sometimes at a younger age than guys do. So in that way, we may have to mature faster, emotionally, kind of match the physical development there. So while our reproduction and endocrine glands are changing, other aspects of our lives are changing too. The heart size doubles. Girls' heart rate is 5 beats faster than the average boy's. Lung vital capacity, amount of air that can be exhaled after a deep breath, increases rapidly. And boys tend to overtake women in physical strength. Because boys do have more muscle growth than women do. I'm not sure if that's just from stimulation or if it's just because of greater evolutionary advantage. So also we have greater vital capacity when you get older. So we do have certain physical advantages. I mean, adults can handle physical challenges better than kids can, obviously. That's one of the reasons we were talking about child labor before, and how kids working in the coal mines is not a good idea. Kids can't handle the same stuff adults. Because now we are stronger as adults. We do grow more muscle mass. Let's talk about obesity for a second. Yeah, there is a reason, I'm so much I hate talking about obesity in terms of childhood weight. It is important because it's also important to make sure we're eating well and developing good habits. Because it does set a person back a certain disadvantage when it comes to, emotional and physical health. So obesity means you're extending a specific body mass index (BMI). Okay, you can still be a fit, strong person and have a high BMI. It is possible, but you don't want to make things harder on yourself, especially when you're young. So you have about 20% of African American, let's say African American adolescents are obese. 20%. That was a huge issue for a while. We're trying to rectify that. So let's put it this way: why do you think that Americans are so obese? What do you guys think? Yeah, that's one. I mean, if you can, I used to live off bean burritos when I started college. That's all I had. I was poor. So bean burritos were 79 cents back then. I just spend $1 and get a burrito and a cup of water. That's how I lived. And that was a fast food diet for a while. But one thing I noticed that differs between U.S. and Europe. This is something I told when I spoke to a European person. They said that the U.S. is primarily dependent on cars to get around. And that threw me for a loop. Because everywhere in the UK depending on walking, biking, and public transportation. It's very different from here. And there was surprising how many cars around here when I talked to a European person who was staying here from my husband's company. I was like, oh, that's new. So, like I said, more automobile based, sleep decline, and physical activity from middle childhood to adolescence because we're forced to go to school earlier, and the older you get, the earlier you go to school, and we're trying to change that. We're trying to get high school kids in school a little later because it's hard to focus in your morning classes when you're so tired, right? Especially when you have to go to school super early. And also, software and machines don't help. So, honestly, guys, I mean, all of us don't eat naturally. All of us, we eat on whatever we can get our hands on. That's one of the reasons I have a little bit more money now. I can afford to eat things I actually like that are good for me, but that's not the case for everyone in the world. So you kind of got to watch how we approach this as a social issue. And it's very common, it's very easy for a child to gain weight and be stuck in a pattern of obesity. But that's more common in more impoverished areas. You know this. It's more common in impoverished areas. So as you can see, in the United States, there's much higher obesity rates in certain developed countries. There's some in Greece, some in Lithuania, but you notice that in Europe it's not nearly as big a deal in the Western world. And there are typically more boys obese than women, young girls. So honestly, we have different physical functioning. Peak bone mass is reached in the 20s. Darn, I missed that too. We have maximum oxygen uptake, great cardiac output. We tend to be at our best physical health in our 20s. And we have a reaction time fastest in our 20s as well. So the amount of blood pumped is really peaked in 25. So we do become physically more adaptable at this time. So most people have their peak of physical functioning during emerging adulthood. So this is the 18 to 24 range. Remember what I covered 2 weeks ago? I know, right? It's like, how are we supposed to remember that? It's 2 weeks ago. I covered emerging adulthood being that period of like young adulthood when you're just kind of becoming an adult, but you're not fully equipped. You know, happens during that time. So I did put a chapter question about this. I don't know if you guys had a response to it at the time. So if you had, I did put a chapter question for chapter 2. Puberty begins earlier in cultures where good nutrition and medical care are widely available. U.S. compared to what? Certain countries in Africa, right? Tend to have better medical care here, or at least more ready medical care. So puberty might very well start earlier here. But it's not just true of developed versus non-developed countries. It's also true versus 100 years ago versus now. I don't know if you guys remember, but if you ever read Romeo and Juliet, yeah, you probably had to read that for school. I remember specifically Juliet was turning 14, and her mother expected her to get married. I'm like, holy, I couldn't imagine being married at 14. But I was so not ready for that. But women were bred to get married very young back then. Matter of survival. Whoever's texting me is gonna get smacked. So within countries, adolescent girls from affluent families menstruate earlier than girls from poorer families. Because they have access to or might be a genetic thing. To have a sense of reaction range, genes establish a range of possible development environment determines where it takes place within that range. So genes and environment do interact here. There's a whole bunch of different correlations. But honestly, we did start puberty way later in the past than we do now. Because you remember Julie was 14. I know most people start their periods now at 9 to 12. I think I've seen some girls start them at 7 at the earliest. And they tend to start earlier, but it has a lot to do with what we're eating, where we're coming from, how readily medical care is available for us, and that's all part of it. We do have cyclical trends, like if you notice that people are starting puberty earlier and earlier since the 1830s. He was trying to put Juliet as marriageable and ready to have kids out of the age of 14. I don't think a lot of 14-year-olds are able to do that these days. So in 2010, we had people right above the age of 12 starting it. And the US is in red, so we're a bit higher. At one point, the world average was around 17. So that's a bit new. Things change over time, you know. Over time, we have the steady decline in age. I don't know if that's better or worse, but keeping relatively younger is one of the challenges that comes from living in the modern day world, right? So, why do you think that is? Why do you think the secular trend is going down? Why do you think we start puberty earlier now as women than we did? I have the perfect audience, don't I? Why do we start puberty earlier now than we did 100 years ago? Do you think it's just genes? Do you think it's just, you know, adaptation? Yeah. The thing is, we are typically living longer. I don't understand. We, as humans, we're typically living longer now than we were like 100 years ago. Back then, 30 was old. I'll be ancient. I'm 31. I'll be ancient if I was living like 200 years ago. We have, like 100 years ago, 4% of the population was elderly. Now we have 14% population is elderly people. We do, on habit, live longer now because of increased medical care. I often wonder, why does that mean we're starting puberty earlier? I never quite understood that in its entirety. It has to do with a whole bunch of other factors. Genetics is part of it. You know, you can determine when you're going to go into puberty based on when your mother did. You know, when your biological mother did. You can determine it as part of the world that you're living in, the access to medical care you have, a whole bunch of different reasons. You can kind of predict it based on familiar trends. Example, USA, if you're from African descent, you tend to start from 12 to 13. If you're high income, you start lower. If you're low income, you start later. And that's a general trend that doesn't have to do with everybody, you know. There are some people who are lower income that start later, but I don't think that's very common. European descent with high income start around 13. Low income tends to start between 13 and 14, typically. And South Africa has a pretty wide range of that. So the age of monarchy might be inversely related to wealth. Might have to do with access to medical care, might have to do with how easy it is to get help. I'm not sure. With your body not having a lot to do with it, I'm not sure entirely. But that's something to think about, isn't it? There's a negative correlation, if you will. Do you remember learning that in intro if you took intro yet? Oh, took intro? Oh, man. I want to teach you guys all about that stuff, too. I took psychology. Oh, yes, you probably learned all about negative correlations. So there's negative correlation between amount of income and age of onset of puberty. The more income you have, typically the earlier you go into puberty. So, ritual initiation into adolescence. Monarchy often initiates a monthly ritual that lasts out a woman's reproductive life. So, basically, it marks when you're a woman or have the ability to have children. And there is some cultures who have very strict ceremonies having to do with that. Around the U.S., what do we have? We have like a quinceanera or something like that. Some people it's a coming out party, but that's not just that. That's going into adulthood, not necessarily becoming a biological woman, you know. But some cultures they do. Some cultures in the West and some cultures in Africa they do have a ceremony surrounding that. I don't know about you, but if I was a little girl, I'd be super embarrassed having to deal with that. Oh yeah, you're a woman now. Let's celebrate. I'm like, no, give me some chocolate and get out of the way. Go, shoo. I don't want to deal with that. But that is the thing. Okay, guys, it's 12:47. I don't want to keep you longer. Okay, puberty rituals. For males, they don't focus on a particular biological event. For women, it's kind of obvious when we enter our reproductive cycle. It's obvious for us for men, not so obvious. So puberty rituals for boys often require them to endure physical pain. I think in some Native American cultures they do hooks. I'm not gonna gross you guys out, but they do hooks in the skin as a way to mark manhood. Some people stick fight in the Tulsa tribe. I can't pronounce it right. Also, that's how it's pronounced. I'm a huge Trevor Noah fan. He speaks Tulsa, so that's all I know. So it's often violent. Men are often asked to prove their manhood, you know, and it seems necessary to face life's challenges. They make guys do something physical, and I don't know if they do that here, but I guess that's one of the reasons why we tend to pressure our young men into sports so much as we do now. That's like a physical thing. It's like when you go into puberty, hey, join a sport. Okay, so sometimes we have parent-adolescent relations. Relationships typically become cooler, but conflict increases and physical closeness is less likely. When you're a kid, you know, you can be very close to your mom. When you hit puberty, it's like, okay, I want to establish my own life. My friends become more important to me than my real relationships. I might ask for more space for my family. You see kids getting on Snapchat nowadays, and you start making your family. They're still a priority, but your friends are where you go to for advice and where you seek approval from. That's kind of how that works. So you don't tend to cuddle your mom as much during puberty as you do when you're a kid. So girls often look closer to their mothers in other traditional cultures because they tend to see their mothers as like a guide for what they're going through. So a lot of girls start fighting in Western cultures, but in other cultures they tend to get really close to their parents, particularly their moms, and to look to them because especially in certain Eastern cultures, I imagine an issue there. So for daughter talking, it tends to increase around age 14, 11 to 14, and kind of steadies out from 15 to 18. But sun's touching and touching tends to go down generally in these areas, male and female. By the age 15, 18, continue to get really, really close physically. Age 6 to 10, but it tends to decline on 15 to 18. I guess that's to do more with the independence thing. So it comes on sun talking tends to increase way more than touching does. I think that's kind of interesting how puberty and parental communications kind of change. Okay, so it's at 12:50, guys. I'm gonna start on slide 37, and I'm probably gonna finish this up on Friday. Just do a quick little cover for all this. I'm also gonna. I know I have chapter 2 quiz up, right? Questions about the quiz. Okay, so I'm gonna post that tonight. Get that done, and make sure I'll go over with you by Monday. I'll make sure I'll have it. If you guys want to post it tonight, if you get done by Friday, I'll make sure I'll correct it individually and can address some stuff on Friday too. So you guys can instead of comparing your text, I put the quizzes. That's something too. I can do that. I thought because when I posted the quiz, but I realized that the hurricane kind of got me out of whack and kind of was not scheduled. That's not your fault. That's mine. I'll fix that. It's all good. Yeah. So I'm gonna make sure that gets done tonight because I'm working from 4 to 9 tonight as well. I basically working on step labs, so I don't have a lot of time to get this stuff done. So I'll finish that tonight. And we can kind of talk about it on Friday. I'm probably gonna open up WebEx at 12 and just talk about it. If you guys can't make it, you can just look at it later. It's no big deal. Is that okay with everyone? Do you have an issue with me doing that? Because my coach didn't say, oh, you can't. My partner didn't say, oh, you don't have to do this or don't do that. But as long as it's okay with you, I want to make sure I do this. I have a hard time covering the entire chapter in one class. One more thing, I'm also I got rid of chapter 6, I think, or chapter 4. I think I read chapter 6, so the next test is just going to be on 4 and 5. Because I want to make sure that because I do this stuff with quite a bit of data for the hurricane, yeah, we'll have plenty of time. So make sure you look at the updated course plan, and I'm going to upload this to YouTube so I can post that in the announcement section. All right, guys. I'm waving at